This is one of the case halves I made a little while ago with my vacuum forming system. In order to release it from the mould, if you use a craft knife and score fairly deeply along the perimeter, fairly close to the edge, but of course not harming the walls, you can then pop and bend this so that it comes out from the residue, leaving you with this. Of course we don't want to have the lip, and we want to make sure that it's all a nice even height. So a good method for doing that is to utilise a CD marker pen. And it doesn't matter what you use and for height. I shouldn't really be using TurboGrafx cartridges, but it's about the right height. Pop your pen on top, use a nice flat surface, excuse my finger, when you get into the golden rule of make sure you know where the knife is going when you're cutting. I thought, oh, I'm not too careful here, I'll probably cut my finger. A few seconds later I did. Anyway, remove the pen along, keeping your pressure on the bottom of the case. You'll end up with a nice line going all the way around the system, which then gives you a good guide in order to cut. If you cut just above the line itself, and then afterwards we're going to sand it flat so it's all nice and smooth, flat and level. And this is the top part, nearly complete. I've used a sanding drum on the Dremel to get the sides pretty good, and then rub them along like this on the sandpaper. The result is very, very smooth indeed. I'm going to do the same with the bottom half, also cut all the holes. We're then going to connect the two case halves together and then give it a good sanding across before painting. In order to work out the precise position for the screen, I put the screen onto the board and then just tied through a little bit of wire to connect the two. This means I can position the board exactly in place and then mark on each of the corners where the screen rests. Although that's the perimeter of the screen, it will then give us the gauge to work out where the visible screen area is. In order to do that nice and easily, we use the casing from the original screen. If you turn it around, you see the areas, these tabs here where the screen would normally be held into. So if we cut these parts off and also reduce the size of this, you end up with a nice little template which can then go inside the case and provide us with the positioning for the screen itself. And this is one that I did earlier, which clearly shows the points on the outside and also the dead center for the hole cutting. This is a template I prepared for the case. All the little shapes here refer to the buttons and the placement of the controllers. The lines here denote the exact position of the case, so that I wasn't going to cut the holes, for example, for the buttons too close and go over to the area. Talking of the buttons, I'm utilising the mica control pad, the Super 64 pad, really because the buttons on here are very flat, as of course is obvious from looking at the side of the pad itself. However, the four C buttons effectively are in a diamond shape. I need it to be square. So all I'm going to do is to cut out each of these individual holes with the supports, because on the back of them we have the slots which correspond to the slots in the buttons, and that stops the buttons from rotating. So each of these will be positioned inside the case, sanded down so that the buttons aren't too high, and I've literally just utilised them as a template in order to then know the areas I need to cut out. In fact, everything that's black on these parts will be cut through. For the joystick area, I'm not going to use the official one. I don't particularly like it, so I'm using a third-party controller, and therefore I'm also going to use a third-party joystick, which I'll provide more details on later. The original PlayStation controller for the Sony One. Has a nice support area to support the board, and therefore this can be installed in the system quite easily and quite comfortably. Therefore it seems logical to make the hole for the position in the case. This is just a mock-up to illustrate how it will look. It looks quite crude at the moment. I've literally just put all the buttons in place and the controllers. The screen, of course, only the visible area will be shown, not the silver surround. But once you produce the template, it's very important just to double check that everything will work as it should do. You can hold it, work it in position. A button will be here, the B will be here. It's easy to get to all the controls, quite natural. And even if you have to adjust your hand to play on the D-pad, for example, you need to be able to hold the system nice and easily, and your fingers aren't at funny angles, so it needs to feel quite natural. Now, these are all the tools I use to cut all the holes out and make them nice and smooth. Start off with a drill bit to cut around close to the edge of each of the shapes. Then use a variety of sanding drums, grinding stones in order to get a nice smooth surface. On the screen I use one of these flexible foam pads to finish it off, to get the edges nice and smooth, and prior to that these, which are also used for the D-pad, in order to give them a nice grind. They're quite sort of small files, but they're very, very good. And then to remove all of the marks from the CD pen, just use a standard pencil eraser. And this, as I say, is the result so far. There's more holes required to be cut out, speaker holes, on-off, various other ones of that nature, but you can see how it's progressing.